Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Just give it a second or two, and I'll just start to share my screen. We're going to do, and there's a lot of people who know this stuff, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is just about how we generate affidavits of execution and deal with counterpart, things like that. And we'll get going, and we can open the floor to any other questions that people have. So, without further ado, I will start my screen sharing. So, we're going to talk about affidavits of execution, and eState can generate those automatically when you generate documents. You can also generate them anytime. Usually for our firm, the workflow is basically we'll generate the drafts with no date yet, and therefore we don't generate the affidavits of execution at that point. We send the drafts out. And then before the signing, that's when we regenerate the affidavits of execution with the execution date in there and the witnesses, whoever the witnesses happen to be. But here's what I'm going to show you first, and that's basically setting up your documents. So for each of the documents, I'm going to go just to the short will, for example. When you're setting up your documents, you can set a few things as your default, as you know. You're not going to set a signing date as a default, probably, but if you do a lot of virtual execution, counterpart executions, then you could always set it by default to use counterpart execution. If you're like me, I don't. I do that at more rarely, so I won't have that as my default. You can also set the affidavit of execution to be automatically generated every time you generate a will by default. If you are in the practice of having each of the witnesses execute an affidavit of execution, then you can check off dual affidavits. That means it's going to generate an affidavit for each of the witnesses. And if you often swear and commission an affidavit virtually, then you can set that off as a default as well. And the last thing that you might want to set off is, as a default, is who the commissioner is. For me, almost on every affidavit of execution, I'm the commissioner, so I would put my name in here as the default. And that, if you're on a pro plan, you can have different commissioners for each lawyer. If you're on Growing Your Flex, you can just set one. And that's applicable for every one of your documents. So if you're finding that you're, for example, adding different witnesses each time, or adding the same witness every time, then set them as your default witnesses down here. And then they'll always appear by default unless you want to change it at any particular time for a particular client. So what I would do is I would set my witnesses to be who my typical ones would be. And the deponent is going to be the person who's swearing. If you generate only a single affidavit, it's going to be the affiant or the deponent for that affidavit. Okay. So that's what I would suggest you do if you haven't done that already, is set up your default witnesses and set up your options for including affidavits of execution if you want to, or counterpart executions, etc. So let's then, once we've set that up, let's go to a client here and show how you can use that. So I've finished the plan for Homer Simpson and I want to generate their will. So I will go to the document generation and we'll generate, let's just say, a short will for Homer. So the left tab here is our options, and this is where you can change any of the defaults that you might have used. Because I'm on a pro plan, I can import someone's default options. Like I can call in my own, I can call the firm's own. If I'm a clerk and I'm working for multiple lawyers, I can pull out the particular lawyer who I'm working for. I can pull all of their defaults in. But if you're on growing, you basically just have one option here. And this is where you would choose, okay, for this particular client, I'm going to be signing it on the 30th of April or any day that you want to pick, the 15th of May. And I'm going to be doing a counterpart execution. So I'm going to click on that. I want to include an affidavit of execution. Maybe I want an affidavit for each of the witnesses because we're doing counterpart. I'm going to want an affidavit from, probably an affidavit from the Law Society's licensee. And the date of the affidavit will probably be the same as the date of the signing, but it might not be, right? It might be some later date. The commissioner I could fill in here as well. And then I'm ready to generate, right? So I can either do just a preview and see what I'm going to get. And it would, for wills, it will show you the preview for the affidavits. So here are the different, here's the affidavit for Test, one of the witnesses, right? The witnesses are down here, Test, Demo, and Wally. So it's going to generate the execution, affidavit of execution in counterpart. And there's the second one for Wally, who says basically the reverse. So that was that was the idea there. So then what we have is we can download those documents as well. Okay, so that's how you when you click download, it's going to generate 3 documents automatically. If I've checked off I want to include my affidavits of execution, it's going to check off all of them. Okay. And so the will and the 2 affidavits. Okay. So that's how we deal with the affidavits of execution. Now, I'm just going to look at Homer here and just see special circumstances. So because we checked off that Homer has vision problems, it puts in by default this idea that he might be blind in case that's the issue. So just so you know why that affidavit said that if I unclick that, then the affidavit of execution would not reference any blindness or problems. Thanks. Do you stamp the will Exhibit A and attach it to the original will? Yes. So crucially, when you've signed the just so you know, when you sign the affidavit of execution and you stamp the back of the will, and you always stamp the signing page and the back of the signing page with the exhibit stamp. Okay, and so that's what you're basically doing for the affidavit, and it is an exhibit to the will itself. The will is an exhibit, sorry, to the affidavit. So that's the idea behind that. Now, when you're doing multiple wills, so a couple things. When you're doing multiple wills, what you're going to do is have an exhibit, an affidavit of execution for each of the wills. And that's what eState will automatically do. And it'll generate one for the primary will, and it'll generate one for the secondary will. And so that's basically what's going to happen there. So let me just do one thing here. Just going there. Okay. So that's how we do it. Now, remember that when you're doing counterpart, one of the witnesses has to be a lawyer. And so eState will see that, because when you put people in to be witnesses, and I'll just show you a little bit about that. Under the People tab, so here we have clients, documents, people. Under the People tab, this is where you have all of your users, right? All of the people that you're paying for, those are lawyers and law clerks who use eState regularly. The other tab is if you have any people that you use as witnesses that you don't, who aren't users. So maybe your spouse is witnessing wills for you, and they're not a user of eState, but you want to have their name populate and all of that. That's when you can add them to the other tab. You won't be charged. They're free. You can have as many as you want, but they're a roster of witnesses that when you generate the will, you could pull them up as one of your options for witnesses, and it'll put in all of their information. Okay, so that's how you use alternate witnesses as well. So those are the comments. Now, for when we're doing powers of attorney, same sort of thing. We don't have a court form for affidavits for witnesses of powers of attorney. And so basically what we did at eState is we came up with our own, because we figured, listen, if you're trying to deal with a bank who's relying on a power of attorney that was signed in counterpart, they're going to notice it was in counterpart. And one of the requirements to counterpart is that it is that one of the witnesses has a licensee of the Law Society. So that's why we want, if you're doing counterpart affidavit, counterpart powers of attorney, I would also do what we just call an affidavit of witness. And I think I have an example here. Let me just see if I have an example. Power of attorney counterpart. Let's try this one. Yes, so this is the so-called affidavit of witness, and that we added basically for a power of attorney for property or personal care, in case you're in that situation where you're doing it remotely. Just out of curiosity, how many people are doing it regularly where you're doing virtual executions? Are people doing that regularly, or not really? Most people are doing. I do almost all of mine. I do in person, just because it's, I just find that it's so much easier. So anyway, not virtual, rarely, not at all, rarely. Good. Yeah, that's sort of my experience as well. So yeah. Other questions or comments? So I mean, that was basically what I wanted to talk about as far as witnesses goes, and affidavits of execution, and those kinds of things. So give me 1 second. I'm just checking to see if there's any other issues that we needed to deal with on this. Give me a second. Yeah. I think, Tim, did you, anybody have any other points here that they wanted to raise with me? A new form in Nova Scotia. Yes, thanks, Tim. Yeah. Ontario, by the way, also, ironically, also had changes to their forms. But Tim, if you want to send me that new form, that would be wonderful. We can incorporate the changes. That'd be wonderful. We also, for those who didn't realize, the forms, the estate forms in Ontario changed, not the affidavit of execution, but other forms changed. And I'll just maybe send this around, just paste it in the chat. If anybody's unaware of that, there have been some changes to the court forms that became required to be altered. And I'll put that in the chat. So here's the link. I'm showing you on my screen, we have, if you're doing affidavits or executions by counterpart, we posted way back when COVID hit, Ian and I came up with our own execution checklist for, basically we made it up because we didn't know what the law really hadn't kept up. I mean, we had the virtual execution, but nobody, including the Law Society or the Canadian Bar Association or anybody, gave us any idea of how to do things. So Ian and I came up with an idea that we thought was necessary under those circumstances. You can find it on our blog, and we can post that for you. But it's a real fulsome. When we didn't really know what we had to do, we really put together a very comprehensive procedure. Certainly now as we're getting used to it, I'm not sure we need to hold up the first page and all of those things that we thought we might have to do before. But this is a useful. We have one for POAs and we have one for at will execution, and I'll post that link to our blog with the links to those checklists here in chat as well, in case you're ever wondering if you're doing doing the executions, counterpart executions properly. You can use that. I know that the Law Society eventually endorsed our version of things, which was a bit nice, and just kept referring people to our checklist. And so anyway, that's that. You can't, by the way, they're no longer allowed, but if anyone was thinking about it, to have the client sign, the testator sign, then send you the one sign, then the witnesses get on and sign separately. That is no longer allowed. It hasn't been allowed for a long time. It was allowed first under COVID when it first came out, but now it's all by counterpart. And so you're going to have a whole bunch of documents. So for example, let's say you've got the original will that the testator signed. You have the original copy that the witnesses signed, all in the presence of one another in counterpart. Then you bring those two together. You staple them all because together they're a will. Okay, the will is together. And then the back of, the back of one of the signing pages, I usually put the back of the testator's sign page, but that doesn't matter, is the exhibit stamp. There's only one affidavit of execution for that one exhibit, the two documents together. In the old days, we weren't sure what was going to be the procedure, so we talked about making a separate affidavit for each of the different documents, but that is not required. You put them together and they're one document, and that's the one exhibit to the affidavit. So, yes, Tim, thanks for clarifying it was Nova Scotia, because you had me panicked that I had missed a change, but we didn't, so that's good. So that's what I wanted to cover on the execution of wills, affidavits of execution, and setting up your witnesses. And I staple mine to the will. I don't think it has to. I mean, it doesn't have to be, but technically it's the affidavit that you're filing with the will as an exhibit. But yeah, I staple mine. I staple the affidavit of execution to the back of the will as the last page. Anybody have a different? I mean, that doesn't mean it's right. So, but I've never had a problem. But that's typically, that way we don't lose it. That's the other thing. Any questions about execution that, especially with eState, or how you generate affidavits or set up your witnesses, your default witnesses? That's a really time-saving feature, is to have those witnesses ready to go, puts in all of their addresses and all that stuff, everything you need, their occupation and that kind of stuff. So feel free to unmute if you like and just shout out a question. Nope. All right. Anybody have any questions about doing something in eState that they wanted me to show or demonstrate? If we can, happy to do that. Or not, that's okay too. This Thursday, I'm leading the webinar, and we're doing it on planning for no descendants. So where your client you know, the disaster type scenario, how, you know, what to think about, how to advise clients, those kinds of things. And of course, you know, that eState deals with that. And so, but we'll certainly talk about what things to worry about when you're doing that kind of planning. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to suggest we adjourn today a bit early, and we'll see you again next week, I hope. And just a heads up as well, on the 16th. So this is going to be the 2nd. On the 16th, 2 weeks from Thursday, Ali Spinner is going to be here to talk about the capital gains inclusion rate changes and how that might affect our estate planning issues. On the 23rd, I think it is, Ian Labane from TD is coming to join a panel to talk about resident trusts and the principal residence exemption, using trusts for the principal residence. So we'll talk about that on the 23rd. And Ian is leading the charge on the 9th of May. And I don't know yet what his topic is, but that gives you an idea of what's coming up. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I hope to see you guys on Thursday. Thanks again. Feel free to reach out anytime.